Our speaker will be Sarah Cook, who is the Executive Director of SeaChange Marine Conservation Society, which is dedicated to the understanding, protection, and restoring marine environments. Sarah has 25 years of experience working in marine environments of the Pacific Northwest and specializes in benthic communities and habitat mapping. I will have to ask her to explain what benthic means, because I don't know. SeaChange is currently working on the resilient estuaries of the Salish Sea Initiative, which is focused on the small to medium-sized estuaries of the Salish Sea and helping them maintain resilience against the impacts of climate change and increased human activity. SeaChange also has a large-scale mapping project called Shore Zone, which provides accessible information on our coastline to help with resources management, restoration, and conservation initiatives and emergency management planning. So let's welcome Sarah Cook. Sarah?
Thank you very much for inviting me to come speak at your meeting tonight. I'm really glad to get a chance to talk to this group because I feel there's a lot that we do that will be of great interest to you. So yeah, if there are any questions as I'm talking, please don't hesitate to just throw up your hand or just shout out and ask. I always like to have interactivity as we're going along, but I think there'll also be a chance to ask questions at the end as well. So as I was just introduced, my name is Sarah, and I'm the Executive Director of SeaChange. I've been in this position for about the last 3.5 years. I moved to SeaChange from a long time in the consulting world where I got a little bit tired of just observing things or being told which areas I was going to study or saying, we're going to be putting a dock in over here. Can you tell us if it's going to impact anything, instead of me being able to say, well, you know what, there's a beautiful eelgrass bed there. How about we protect that? So I decided at a certain point in my career that I wanted to be a little more active in terms of what I was observing and what I was seeing in the coastline. So I made the move to SeaChange. And I have to say that moving to a nonprofit organization has been, particularly stepping in as executive director right off the bat, has definitely been a learning curve for me, but certainly a good one. So as was noted, our mission, which is, it's very straightforward but not simple. It is to understand, protect, and restore coastal ecosystems. So we can summarize it in a fairly straightforward sentence, but what that actually means in practice is a lot more complicated. I also just wanted to put up our land acknowledgement that we have, that we always try and do. So SeaChange, our office and our staff, we are situated on the Coast Salish and Strait Salish territories of those Saanich and Lekwungen-speaking peoples. However, we do work across Turtle Island, the land that is now known as North America. So we are committed to trying to take action to make sure to meaningfully engage with the Indigenous nations in whose territories we do work, which is, as you'll see, all across North America. So I'm going to start the talk today with something that, and I'm going to sort of get into our resilient estuaries and our shore zone programs. But I just kind of wanted to start with something that I thought would be of particular interest to this group, which is looking at eelgrass beds. So who here has been kayaking through eelgrass beds that you guys notice? It's going, yeah. So you guys know what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to take you through 5 cool eelgrass facts. So first of all, eelgrass is a plant and not a seaweed. So eelgrass is actually a flowering plant. So we worked with a local artist to put up a lovely life cycle of what's known as Zostera marina, which is the Latin name for eelgrass. And as you can see, it actually does flower underwater. So hang on, yeah, there we go. You can see the little white flowers. If you go out into a bay that has eelgrass in the late spring, usually May, June maybe, you'll actually be able to, if you go underwater, you'd actually be able to see the flowering portions of it, these little white flowers, and actually the pollination that happens, if you ever go out there and there's a sort of a skim of yellow all across the water, that's actually the pollen. So, yes?
What time of year does it flower?
Usually May, June. So it depends on the bed, it depends on the temperature, but yeah, usually around May or June. So if you're ever out there and you see this sort of skim of yellow on the surface, that's actually probably the pollen from the eelgrass beds. So then, of course, they do reproduce by seeds, which then drop to the seafloor and germinate. So it's actually interesting, these used to be land plants because all of flowering plants evolved on land, but like whales and other marine mammals, they actually moved back into the ocean. So, which again, whales started off as land mammals who moved back into the ocean. So it's kind of an interesting, a very interesting plant with an interesting life cycle, but they also grow through colonial shoots that they put out. So they actually grow, you can see down here, that they actually do put out, they grow forward and will actually clone themselves. And if any given part of that breaks off, it will actually form a new plant. So there's a number of different ways that it can reproduce. Eelgrass, particularly Zostra marina, which is the species that we have here, is everywhere. So you can actually see it's a very northern hemisphere heavy, and it goes all the way up into the Arctic, and not quite into where till the ice freezes to the bottom, of course, and then of course it can't live in those areas. But it exists all across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, and it is the same species. So around here, and this is actually some data from our shore zone habitat mapping system, which I will show you. One of the things that we do is map, but just showing you where we've mapped some of the eelgrass beds around here. So this is obviously Victoria. We're somewhere right in there, I think, somewhere around there. And that's Sydney Island and James Island, and of course Salt Spring. So you can start to see any of the light green polygons are where we've mapped eelgrass beds. So we can see that throughout the Strait of Georgia, it's a very common habitat, a very common ecosystem. And there we are around Lasqueti and up north. So it is sort of everywhere. And one of the reasons, there's a couple different reasons we should be happy about that. One of which is that eelgrass protects our coastline. So when waves are coming, you can kind of see this is a more tropical seagrass, but it shows a really nice way that the roots actually stabilize the sediments. So as the waves are coming into shore and they hit these tall plants, eelgrass plants can be 3 meters tall. I mean, when you get in the deeper parts, they can be up to 3 meters tall. So they can be quite tall plants. So they actually cause drag along the bottom because they're bending with the waves, and they actually slow the waves down. So in bays, you will see that eelgrass is in sandy habitats, but they're actually creating the sandy habitat themselves. So they would need some sand to form in, but you'll actually notice that in a bay with an eelgrass bed, generally speaking, it will become sandier, and it will maintain that sandy beach over time because it is actually slowing down the wave action and causing that sediment to drop out of suspension. But it also reduces the height of the waves in a storm situation. So particularly with rising storm levels that we are seeing around the world due to climate change, that's a very important function that it is providing for us. Other, of course, things that it provides for us is it absorbs carbon. So it is what is known as a blue carbon habitat, which means that it absorbs carbon out of the water at a rate much higher than an equivalent terrestrial ecosystem would. So for example, a grass meadow, because this is essentially a grass meadow underwater, but it's pulling carbon out of the water a lot faster than a terrestrial grass meadow would. And one of the consequences of that, of course, it also is producing oxygen for us as well, which is great. It's really interesting if you ever, I'm a diver myself, and if you ever can stop breathing as you dive underwater, don't do it for too long, obviously, but just hold your breath for a second. If you're in an eelgrass bed, you'll hear a lot of crackling, and that's the oxygen moving through the eelgrass. So that's actually one reason it sits upright and floats in the waves, is because there's oxygen moving through it, and you actually hear it moving through the plant, and it creates this sort of lovely crackling sound. So an eelgrass bed has a sound all of its own, which is kind of neat. But also that drawing down of the carbon dioxide out of the water reduces ocean acidification. So this is the process by which carbon dioxide in the water forms with water molecules to form hydrocarbonic acid, which is, as that gets to be too high in the water, which occurs as the water warms, the warmer it is, the more acid that's going to be forming, it can actually have a big impact on shellfish. So if you love to eat mussels, if you love to eat oysters, ocean acidification is a very bad thing. Because especially as they're little and just settling out, what the acid does, it actually dissolves the calcium carbonate that makes up the shells of those organisms. So eelgrass, however, buffers against the effects of ocean acidification by removing more of that carbon dioxide. So it's also protecting a lot of our fisheries. In addition to that, as if we needed more reasons to love it, it creates habitat. So it is what is known as a nursery habitat. So every salmon that you have ever eaten has lived some part of its life in an eelgrass bed. Because as it comes out of its natal rivers, as little tiny fry, it's moving into a habitat where it is going to be protected. So it can hide. As you can see, I've got it hiding in amongst and that's actually why salmon fry have these bars along their sides. It actually helps them to blend into the eelgrass beds, and it breaks up their body shape so that predators can't see them as well. But in addition to that, eelgrass beds actually have a special zooplankton community that's associated with them. So that's the little microorganisms in the water. And they're called harpacticoid copepods, and this is the preferred food of salmon fry. So they actually, and it will be preferentially found around eelgrass beds. So these are extremely important habitats for our fisheries, but also for a lot of other species. So we've got things like bay pipefish, which is a relative of the seahorse, which are one of my favorite fish. But they live in the eelgrass beds, and got all kinds of other small fish like gunnels and all kinds of other things. Most crabs have also lived, especially juvenile crab has lived some part of their life in an eelgrass bed. Again, a good place to hide. Clams, there's lots of clams and bivalves and other species that we like to eat. And of course, those are all going to be food for higher level predators like herons or river otters. So this is what is known as eelgrass is what's known as an ecosystem engineer. So it's actually creating a habitat, and it's the basis of that whole habitat. And it's an extremely important thing along our coast. So that was kind of my 5 fun eelgrass facts, and I'm going to take that into what we're doing with our other programs that we have. So we have 2 big programs at the moment that SeaChange is running. One is our resilient estuaries of the Salish Sea, and the other is our shore zone habitat mapping system. So I'm just going to take you a bit through our resilient estuaries first. So the Salish Sea is obviously this inland body of water that's in between Vancouver Island and Vancouver. It, of course, includes down into Puget Sound as well, but of course we're only working on the Canadian side of that border, even though these are very big cross-border issues that we're discussing, so we do have a number of partners we work with across the border. So basically what we are trying to do is look at the small to medium-sized estuaries. So these are the smaller places where rivers or creeks are meeting the oceans. That's what an estuary is a place where the fresh water is meeting the salt water. And these are incredibly diverse places. They're often places where eelgrass beds are found, and salt marshes and other things that are extremely important habitat along the coast. And one reason we're focusing on the small to medium size, because we have a couple of really big estuaries in the Salish Sea, obviously the Fraser being the biggest one. Essentially the entire Salish Sea is a giant estuary if you actually look at it in terms of how much river water from the Fraser is flowing into this system. But there's also places like the Nanaimo River, the Comox-Courtney River, the Squamish River. These are the big ones. They have well-known salmon runs. There's a lot of salmon that comes out of there. But I think what most people don't realize is a lot of that salmon goes directly into other areas. So the salmon that comes out of the Fraser, there's actually not very good habitat on this side of the Strait of Georgia for them to live in. So they actually come straight over to the Gulf Islands. And that's where most of the salmon fry will actually live a good chunk of the first part of their life. And then what they actually do is they move from estuary to estuary and from eelgrass bed to eelgrass bed in what's called the salmon highway. So as they're getting bigger, they move through that as they're heading out toward the open ocean, where eventually they'll head out there and live their adult life. So these small to medium-sized estuaries don't get a lot of attention. But they're an extremely critical link in that salmon highway. So that was where we decided to focus for this particular project. So the idea we're trying to figure out is, what does resilience mean? Because it might mean different things to different people. So what we're particularly interested in is resilience to climate change. So these are warming water temperatures, as we say, higher ocean acidification, a lot more wave action, these kinds of effects, but also this is an area, part of the BC coast, where there's a lot of people living. So there's water quality issues. There's all kinds of other things that could be affecting these estuaries in this area. So what does it mean for an estuary to be resilient against some of these effects? And then what we're going to, that's sort of like one part of the REST project, and then in the second part, we're going actually undertaking actions to enhance that resilience, and that's through restoration, conservation, and education. Yes?
So the area south of Vancouver there on the east side, is it not no eelgrass because it's been polluted and stuff, or is it just not?
Actually, some big eelgrass beds, not so much out here along the front. There are some, but I'll be honest with you, I think it's mostly the wave exposure. It's very, very muddy out there. It's a very dynamic habitat and it's very mobile. So when you actually get down sort of into some of the more protected niches out here, and particularly into Boundary Bay, there are some massive eelgrass beds out there. And certainly that is a good area for them to be in, but it's just not a big enough area for all of the fish that are coming out. All right, so in sort of this first phase of us trying to understand these estuaries that we're going in, we've got a couple of different things that we're doing in places we're collecting data, because we want to make sure that we are basing the actions that we take on data that we've actually been collected. We also are very community-led, so when we go into an estuarine area, we're not going to be the first people to be interested in that area. We're not the people who are living there. We're not the First Nations who have lived there since time immemorial. So what we do is the very first thing we do is ask the people who are living there, what are your priorities? What have you seen? What does resilience mean to you? And then what data do you think should be collected for us to try and answer some of the questions that you might have about it? So we're out there doing some habitat mapping. We're out there doing water and sediment quality, in some cases tissue sampling as well, to see, because there's a lot of estuaries traditionally are very good places for a lot of food gathering, which unfortunately a lot of estuaries these days you simply can't do that anymore because of either water quality issues or other issues that have cropped up. There's a lot of log booming that happens in estuaries because of course the logs are coming down the river. So these are areas that tend to get hit pretty hard with human actions. We're also looking at biodiversity. So that means the communities that are living there, are there a lot of different species? Are there not that many species? So what is that actually looking like? And so our habitat mapping looks something like this, where we're actually taking a boat and we've got a camera that we tow off the back of the boat and we're just going in grid lines. So this is actually what the boat did. These grid lines here are the boat. And then we have someone go through and review all that video and classify it into different habitats. So you can see that there's this green here, which is the vast majority. This is Cadborough Bay. I knew this was an area of particular interest to this group, so I sort of was focusing a bit on the work we've done in Cadborough Bay. And as you can see, the vast majority of it is this sandy with some kind of algae present that would either be probably a green algae or a red algae of some kind, either attached to the seabed or just floating. There's along the sides here, obviously we've got bedrock and large boulders because these are the rocky shorelines around here. And then we've also just got sandy bottom. One thing we did not find was eelgrass when we were out there, which is not really surprising, to be honest with you, because of some other things that we found out there, which I'll elaborate on. We did actually find a few small patches hanging on when some of our divers got out there, which we were really excited about. But so this is sort of the kind of habitat mapping. What we're also mapping is marine debris. So this is something else, and this is sort of one area that SeaChange kind of specializes in, is the mapping and removal of underwater debris. So there are a lot of groups that do shoreline cleanups, which is great and it is very needed, but there is a lot of garbage sitting at the bottom of the ocean that is very hard to get at because you do need divers, but it's not deep enough for ROVs or anything like remote operated vehicles. So it's kind of in that sweet spot where it actually is kind of hard to deal with. And that would include things like derelict vessels, which sadly we don't have the capacity to deal with. But we work with people like the Dead Boat Society or Transport Canada to try and get some of those removed as well, because we know that's an issue on the coast. But all these red dots are areas where accumulations of debris were noted. And you can kind of see this is sort of a side scan that we did as well. And you can see that this is where the eelgrass would be. If there was going to be eelgrass in Cadborough Bay, that's where it would be. But there is a lot of boat anchoring that happens there. There was also a lot of liveaboards that were there for a very long time. And so that was kind of an area where we identified as an issue, and we're trying to decide what would be done about it when the municipality actually did pass a bylaw that ended up seeing a lot of the liveaboards moving out of that area. And so we actually did go ahead with some actions, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So the next thing that we're kind of doing, so we've got this habitat mapping, this debris mapping. We also are looking at water and sediment quality because, of course, everywhere where a river meets the ocean, everything that goes into that river from the land upstream ends up right in that bay. So it's one of the things, we actually have like a water table that we do with kids when we're out at outreach events, where it shows like we get kids to like sprinkle. It's got a watershed model, so it shows the river and it shows the hills, and we get them to sprinkle stuff like Gatorade and stuff over the hills, say this is fertilizer, and then you pour water on it and it just flushes right down out to the ocean. So it's trying to get that idea that everything we do on land in an area like Victoria is going to impact the sea. So we're doing things like looking for agricultural runoff, we're looking for nutrient levels, we're looking for chemical levels, we're looking for bacterial levels. Here's one of our co-op students doing a very technical sampling technique. This is imported gimlet. Fortunately, we could do from the shore. So it's always fun to be one of our co-op students. And there's a couple things that we're actually starting to look at now, which is this idea of 6-ppd quinone, which is I'm sure you guys have probably heard about it in the news. It is something that is a chemical found in tires, and it comes off onto the road, and it is absolutely deadly to fish. So any contact with 6-ppdq is immediately toxic. Fortunately, it doesn't stay resident very long, so sunlight, if it comes into contact with sunlight within about 12 hours, it will degrade and break down, thank goodness, otherwise we'd be in really big trouble. But it does mean that large events where there's a lot of runoff from the roads or stormwater systems can be lethal events happening if there's a lot of runoff happening all at the same time. So there's monitoring for that as well to see what we can see. We're also looking at temperature, we're looking at salinity, we're looking at light levels. So it's a lot of data that we're capturing. And then the biodiversity, we're just looking at what actually lives there. So I don't know if you guys have ever gotten a close-up look at an eelgrass bed. That is a skeleton shrimp. You can see he blends in really well. You can kind of see his arms there as he's clinging on. This is one of the favored foods of fish out there. So skeleton shrimp are incredibly important. Very, very underrated, but really quite fierce looking under a microscope. I can tell you they've got scythe-like little appendages and things like that, and they do try and snap at you, even though they're only about that big. So that is one thing we would be assessing, is what is living there. Is there algae there? Are there different types of fish there? And one of the tools we've actually been using, doing zooplankton tows. So again, looking at that plankton community. Is it healthy? Is it providing what the fish that might live there might need? We're also looking at eDNA technology. I don't know if you guys know what eDNA is. It's known as environmental DNA. So it's the ability to take samples from the water, and you can actually look for, because as fish swim through the water, they're peeing, they're pooping, they're leaving scales, they're leaving bits of themselves. So everything that's in that water is leaving some trace of itself, which generally tends to stick around for about 2 weeks in the environment. So we can be reasonably certain that if we take a water sample in the middle of Cadborough Bay, that we're capturing something that actually lives in Cadborough Bay. So what we're actually doing is going through, and we're looking for a couple different things. We're looking for various salmon species. We're also looking for invasive species. So there is an invasive known as the green crab. I don't know if you guys know what that looks like, but it's definitely something to make yourself aware of, because if you see it, we definitely want it reported to DFO, because it's really important to get those guys before they get too numerous. I understand the Squamish Lagoon's a bit overrun at the moment, so hopefully they'll be able to start getting that under control. There was actually a group we were working with up in Clayoquot Sound with the Hoyayet First Nation, and the Hauset First Nation. And they were trapping in an area that was brand new. So they have crab traps that they put out there, just regular commercial-sized crab traps like this guy over here. And one of the traps they pulled up had 10,000 green crabs in it, in the one trap. And now they're getting about 30 or 40. So this is after a year of consistent trapping effort. So it is possible to keep them under control. One of the annoying things about green crab, of course, why it's an invasive species, it's extremely aggressive and will kill our native crabs, so including small Dungeness and small red rock crab. It also digs up eelgrass. Just because it likes being a jerk, I guess, but I don't know. But so it's one of those things we definitely want to, so we're looking for green crab, we're looking for other organisms that could be either a positive or negative in the environment. So this is kind of a nice non-lethal way of sampling. And then we're going to take all that data and we're turning it into action. So this is where we take that, what we've learned, and we're turning it into a plan to try and help these places be more resilient. And this is actually some of the debris that we found and then removed from Cadborough Bay. So to date, we've done 2 major cleanups in Cadborough Bay. We're going to be going back for a 3rd because, to be honest with you, we haven't got it all. Probably a little over 3 tons now that we've removed from Cadborough Bay and are heading back for more. We found a boat trailer in the middle of Cadborough Bay. No clue how it got there. Toilets, a lot of crab traps. There was a lot of derelict crab traps out there, so we're removing all of those, some of which had quite a few actual crabs in it. Let me just see if I can, there we go. So we actually have a crane barge called the Collective Effort that we use. So our commercial dive team will go down, it tags all the debris, puts ropes on them, puts floats on them, then we come out with our crane barge, pull up everything that we can. There is, of course, a maximum size and weight that we can deal with our little barge, because you see it's not a huge crane. And it's only a 6-meter long barge. But we can get the vast majority of it. We can pull up radiators, we can pull up shopping carts, we can pull up, which we have all definitely pulled up. And anchors, a lot of anchors that have just become separated from their lines, which we then sell back to whoever, whoever lost it. So as you can see, there's actually a lot of live crabs in these traps, so getting rid of this kind of ghost gear that's still catching animals, even though there's nobody that's going to be harvesting and eating them, is an extremely important part. And when we think of ghost gear, we tend to think of very big, large trawl nets, which are a massive issue, but we tend to forget about some of the smaller fishing gear and things like that that will be in more inland waters like these. So that is one of the efforts that we're making in Cadborough Bay. We also, because while we were out there doing the cleanup, we found a couple of patches of eelgrass that were hanging on. We were super excited about that. Now that we have cleaned up that area, we have actually gone in and just last month we went and did an eelgrass transplant. So we harvested eelgrass from a nearby healthy eelgrass bed and transplanted it into that area. So our divers actually go out and they plant it in little clumps of 10. And so we're going to try and help it to recover, because it was pretty obvious in that area that the reason was the constant anchoring and the debris. So what we also did was install no anchor zones. So these are voluntary zones where we've actually marked the area that we're restoring with buoys, and we're asking people to voluntarily anchor outside of that area. Generally speaking, we have very good success with that. Most of the boaters that we deal with have no desire to harm the habitat that they're enjoying so much. If they just know that that is an area that it's not a good idea for them to anchor in, generally speaking, we have a lot of success with that, which we've done in some other places as well, with just sort of nice eelgrass beds that we're not necessarily restoring, but we're trying to conserve, and we'll install no anchor zones, and they tend to get a lot of good feedback. And then organizing a lot of education outreach activities. So we do talks like these, and we do talks to boating groups and other community groups to just sort of help them understand what is out there and what is potentially underwater for them to be looking at.
Where does your funding come from?
So this particular project is funded by 2 large government grants. One is the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund, which is a partnership between the province and Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and the other is from the Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Fund, which is a Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So all of this particular funding comes from government sources. Although in other programs we work with a lot of First Nations and port authorities and other groups like that. But we were very lucky to get this funding over a large period of time. So some other things we're doing, this is not necessarily in Cadborough Bay, but in Portage Inlet, we're supporting other groups that are working on salt marsh restoration. I don't know if you guys know what the biggest threat to our salt marshes are around here, but it's probably not what you'd think. It's Canada geese. Yeah. So we, of course, have a resident population of Canada geese here, which means they stay here all year round. And that was the brainchild of Environment and Climate Change Canada, back when they were only Environment Canada, to try and provide a food source for the Indigenous people of this area over the winter time. I don't even know. But basically now we've got about 15,000 geese that stay here all year round, and they are very hungry. So instead of migrating, they go and they like to nibble the roots. If they just sort of cut off the grasses, that might not be so bad, but they dig them up. And they also mow down eelgrass as well, because of course, again, they just seem to like being jerks too. But there are a number of solutions. We're working with a couple of different groups that are looking at this. I will say goose sausage is actually quite tasty. So that is, hey, they were introduced so that we could eat them, so why not? But also there's egg adeline and other things that have been going on in some of the other estuaries, which means shake the eggs so that they don't hatch. To try and keep the populations under control. But there's also this really incredibly ingenious fencing that the guardians of our Salish estuaries, which their acronym is GOOSE, which we had to cheer them. I didn't know how long it took them to make sure their acronym came out to GOOSE. But this is called ecocultural wattle fencing. And it is because you see that it's just sitting there on the ground. It doesn't even need a lot of spacing, but geese will not walk they won't land in the grasses because they don't know what's there. So they will land on the beach and walk into the grasses to eat them. They will waddle, and they simply will not go over this fence. And they won't, as I said, land in the grasses themselves because they don't know if they'll have the ability to take off again because they're large birds and they need quite a bit of runway. So it is actually enough to keep them out of the salt marshes, and it's made of like willow and birch, and so it just naturally degrades over time. So it's really quite an ingenious solution. So we're starting to work on some of those, and then we can start to replant with some native species. So if you ever see this around, like if you go up into Portage Inlet, going back, if you ever see this kind of fencing up in Portage Inlet and Craigflower Creek, Peninsula Streams and Shorelines is another local organization who are amazing and who we work very closely with. They do a lot of upriver and upstream kind of things, and we sort of are more the marine side of it, so we like to work together a lot to try and get all the issues with the watershed. Yeah?
So eelgrass is an intertidal plant then, it can live above water?
It is actually a subtidal plant, so you will find it out of water at the very lowest tides of the year. On a normal tide, you won't see it coming up out of the water. It doesn't really like to get dry. So, and it lives to about, why do I keep hitting things? It lives to about 5 meter depth below zero level, so a negative 5 meter depth. So it is quite a deep plant, which is why the no anchor zones are particularly important, because a lot of times you simply can't see it from the surface, and so the boaters have absolutely no idea they're anchoring in the eelgrass bed. All right, so that is the end of my little talk about our Resilient Estuaries program. So that is one major program that we're working on. So there's a large pot of funding that we received that we have going until the end of next year, which is lovely. And then I wanted to talk about our other major project that we have at SeaChange, which is our shore zone imaging and habitat mapping system. And this is actually something I've been working with probably my whole career, so for about 25 years, which really dates me. I've been working with this particular habitat mapping. And it actually, when I moved to SeaChange from the consulting company where I was general manager, I actually said, you know what, I really think Shore Zone belongs with a nonprofit organization, and I somehow convinced our parent company to let me take it to SeaChange. So this has kind of been going for a very long time, and I certainly was not the first person to start this. This has been going on for about 40 years on the coast. So this is a very large-scale project that is based on being a very publicly accessible data set, and so everything I'm talking about is available online for download, for use for anybody to use. But basically what Shore Zone is, it's a standardized, which means we have a protocol that we work to, so we've been doing it the same way for essentially 40 years. And we're taking imagery of the coastline, and then we're mapping that, and we put it all into a georeference database, which means every piece of information in there is attached to a point in space. So you can actually see where our observations are being done, and you'll get to see an example of that. So we actually take this from helicopters. So we are flying at low altitude. We're flying about 100 meters up and 100 meters out from the coastline. So we're looking down obliquely into the intertidal zone. We're flying at the lowest tides of the year. So these are generally speaking the big spring and summer tide windows that you get out there where you can see the whole intertidal zone. And we are taking both video and still photos. And we've got a GPS in the helicopter that is telling us where we are every single second. So we're taking a positional fix every single second, which is a lot easier to do now than it was 40 years ago, I can tell you that. But it's really interesting. So we actually do tend to fly with the doors off of the helicopter so we can get better imagery. So there's me in my fashionable flight suit there. I stand out there. So as the biologist, I usually sit in the front and take photos out, and then we have a navigator in the back who's making sure we're getting all the pieces of shoreline, and a geomorphologist who is taking video. So and of course our pilot who is flying us. We work with local pilots, so it's usually a different person each time. So just getting an idea of what shore zone is it is a unique, consistent transboundary coastal data set. So it actually covers about 130,000 kilometers of coastline. So we have imagery and mapping from Oregon, Washington State, BC, most of Alaska, and we've just started working on Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and which is just brand new. We just got back, actually. We started imaging parts of Newfoundland. Which I can tell you, the fog in Newfoundland is aggressive. It doesn't just stay in one place like it does on the coast over here. It follows you around. So it was definitely an interesting learning experience, being able to doing some of the work, and particularly the Bay of Fundy was definitely, in terms of the tide levels, was a bit of a learning curve for us, but it's been a lot of fun. So just getting the idea of what that means. So we have this 130,000 kilometers. We've been doing it for about 40 years, which is 7 presidents and 9 prime ministers. We've got 3 US states, 4 Canadian provinces, 5 now, actually, with Newfoundland. 4 with Newfoundland. And we've had over 80 funding partners. So this has been a massive undertaking over a very long period of time. To get an idea of what our imagery looks like, so this is one of our images from Penelakut Island. You can see the absolutely gorgeous eelgrass bed that exists off Penelakut, absolutely beautiful. This is from Puget Sound. This is the coast of Oregon. Obviously, there's a lot of beautiful exposed coastline out there. This is the Outer Kenai Peninsula, which is up in Alaska. So that is the area, if you go up towards Alaska, past the Panhandle, and then up in towards where Anchorage is, the Outer Kenai Peninsula is on just the outside of that. Really beautiful area, which is really quite funny, actually. They are quite concerned about giant kelp, which is Macrocystis. You guys know what that is? It's one of the canopy kelps we have here. We've got bull kelp and we've got giant kelp, which has all the little bulbs along it. It floats on the surface. They'd never seen it up in there before because it was usually too cold, but with warming water temperatures, it's moving into the area, and they actually are treating it as an invasive species, which is very odd for us out here in BC because, of course, we love giant kelp and think of it as one of our foundational species, so it's been kind of an interesting working with them. And then, of course, in the Bay of Fundy, the big, beautiful red mud flats and tidal flats. It's just been a pretty amazing breadth of imagery that we have seen over the years. So what does our mapping actually look like? So this is an idea. I chose Tumbo Island. I wasn't sure if you guys would be that familiar with it, but it has some interesting areas. But I figured, as kayakers, you probably have been out towards Tumbo and Cabbage. So this idea is what you're seeing here is this is the intertidal zone. So we're actually creating a polygon these days where we have a high water line and a low water line. And we're actually mapping that beach. So you can see here, this is a tidal flat. The orange is a beach face. This pink is a rock platform, and then we actually have cliffs along this side. So you can start to see the width of the intertidal zone in the different places with the different types of shoreline. You can start to see things. I will just say that Shore Zone initially started as an oil spill response tool. So the idea was that it was to help first responders decide where the most sensitive parts of coastline were so that they could respond to those areas first. So we do have something called an oil residence index that we map. So this is the idea of how long crude oil would stay resident on that piece of coastline if there is no human intervention. And we chose crude because it really is the stickiest. So it's sort of the worst case scenario other than Bunker C, which of course is what comes out of Vancouver because that's even stickier. But at that time, that wasn't a concern in BC. So what we've got here, as you can see, on protected sediment beaches, it would take years for this oil. In fact, likely it would never come off that beach. And then you can see, though, on a rock platform with a decent amount of wave action, it would probably only take weeks to months for that to become clean. So in this area, you would want to be keeping oil from getting onto that beach first, essentially. So that's some of the physical mapping that we do. We also map a lot of the biology of the coastline. So you can see here that there's a couple of things that we map. So dune grass, you guys know those big tall grasses at the top of the beach that you only see on the beaches. It is an important, again, blue carbon habitat. We've got, Tumbo has this beautiful salt marsh that sort of connects the two parts of the island there. And then we also have some eelgrass beds, and we have some bulk kelp beds out there. So these are all things that we can map from that imagery. And we provide all of that on our website, publicly accessible, available for download, all of the geodatabase, all of the imagery. So basically what we have is you can see our helicopter track line, and you can click on any given point and see the video or the stills. Yeah.
What's a polygon?
Oh, a polygon is, sorry, I sometimes use weird terminology. A polygon is just a two-dimensional shape. So basically it's saying, I can't really say it's a square or a circle because it kind of is an amorphous shape. So when I say a polygon, I just mean a two-dimensional shape in space. Yeah.
Given that this program's been going on for 40 years, are you also looking at time series from certain locations?
It's interesting, we actually are now. So I will say it was such a large area, it took us a very long time to get through a lot of those. But yeah, there's actually a good chunk of BC now that we've started to reimage and remap, and we are starting to see some changes over time. Particularly on the north coast with sea star wasting disease that happened up there with the poor old sunflower stars that were just dissolving. It turns out they were keeping the urchins under control up there after the removal of sea otters from that ecosystem, because sea otters would eat all the urchins. The urchins would not then eat the kelp, so we'd have big, beautiful kelp beds. It turned out that the sunflower stars were the other thing keeping them under control, and when they died off, the urchins just went absolutely bananas and ate all the kelp. Which was actually, I can recall I was flying around Dundas Island, which is up near the Alaska border, in 2019, and it was just after sea star wasting disease had gotten bad, and I was actually in tears in the helicopter because the kelp was just gone. It was just urchin barrens. All you could see under the seafloor was just urchins. So it was a bit, but having that documented is also, and so that it can be understood and that data can be available for other people to look at is important. Yeah.
I'm wondering what the relationship is between the eelgrass and the bull kelp. Kelp by and large.
Yeah, so it's interesting because they're sort of the, bull kelp is the other major nursery habitat, and it's that other sort of ecosystem engineer on certainly in the Salish Sea, where it is providing that protection for fish, particularly other species like rockfish, lingcod. This is sort of where they're going to be hanging out, is in these kelp beds. And the interesting thing is that they're kind of opposites in terms that kelp beds need rocky habitat and eelgrass needs sandy habitat. So they don't tend to compete with each other at all. They tend to be in two very different places on our coast. So they kind of complement each other in that way, and this is also where bull kelp is an important piece of that salmon highway as well, because as they get bigger, you know, they're swimming out of the eelgrass bed, they can duck into a kelp bed and hide as they're moving along the coast. So they're very complementary ecosystems.
The kelp seeds or propagates via spores.
Yeah, so kelp is a seaweed rather than a flowering plant. So, yeah.
And depth is a big
Depth is a
issue as well.
big concern, yeah. It can only go to about 12 meters, I think. So bull kelp. Yeah, bull kelp. Eelgrass can only go to about 5 meter depth, but of course it doesn't float on the surface the way that bull kelp does. So, yeah, are there any other questions? That's kind of actually about it for me. So just wanted to say, here's if you're interested in what we do, it's our SeaChangeSociety.com is our website, and then shoredome.org is where you can find all the shoresome data. Yeah.
You mentioned this, where your funding comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Did you?
Yeah, so for our Resilient Estuaries project, most of it comes from the federal government. For our Shore Zone project, it's come from over 80 funding partners. So we've been funded by NOAA, which is the U.S. National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. We've been funded by states, we've been funded by the province, by First Nations, port authorities, other community groups, other nonprofit organizations. So it's been quite a mosaic over the years. Yeah. Yes.
Is there anything we should know or do as kayakers, presumably paddling through some of these habitats, that we could do either avoid adverse impacts to them or to help them? Like any suggestions for
Yeah.
us big bad kayakers?
Can certainly appreciate that, yeah. I think one of the things is, definitely like to avoid disturbance to these habitats. So if it is a low tide and the eelgrass is floating on the surface of the water, it usually is best not to paddle through it. But it's probably not going to do that much damage to it because you guys are floating on the surface. But I would say just the usual things is just be careful of anything that's going into the water from the kayak. So making sure plastics are not getting into the water, and just engaging with groups that are doing cleanups, that are doing other things, and just everything we can do in our everyday life, making sure we're not pouring paint down the drain, or not pouring antifreeze or things like that, the things that we know we shouldn't be putting down a drain, because all of that does end up in the ocean. So it's those basic things that we can do to keep them healthy. I thought I did see, did you have a question? Yes.
With your aerial surveys, with drones doing so much now, are you able to switch to those as opposed to the expensive helicopters?
Yeah, it's interesting. This was the first year we had the opportunity to potentially have a drone survey. So one of the major issues with drones is that for most drone companies, you're still required to have line of sight on your drone, so you have to have it within eyesight. And when you're flying, a couple 100 kilometers of coastline in a day, that becomes very difficult. But we did work with a company that was actually willing to sort of modify their fuselage, and they actually had a fixed wing drone, so not a bit more stable of a drone. And we were going to see if we could get them to fly, but in the end, the area that we were in, we couldn't find a proper runway for them to land on, because they could launch via a catapult, but they needed 300 meters of runway to land on still. So we haven't yet been able to find a drone that was affordable for us to try, that could handle the kind of wind and rain that we need, because when we only have about 6 tide windows a year that we can actually fly, we're very limited in terms of when we fly. We haven't yet found one reliable enough to be able to get out there and for a long enough period of time. But we're hoping very soon, because it certainly is a much lower carbon footprint as well. Don't love being out there in the gas guzzling helicopters, although it is a lot of fun. Yes?
Thanks so much for your presentation, Sarah. I have a question about some of the estuary mapping that you've been working on, prioritization, and wondering if you've had any collaboration with the Pacific Bird Joint Venture Habitat, who's also been using a lot of prioritization of all the estuaries along the coast there as well?
Yeah, so we actually have seen the estuary mapping that they've been doing. So they've been a little more focused on sea level rise, which is actually really cool, because as a complementary data set, we can kind of pull their data into ours and hopefully share our data with them. So on our website, actually all of our resilient estuaries data is available as well. So yeah, but we haven't kind of exactly been partnering for them, but we're definitely aware of what each other are doing. We try not to overlap as much as possible, because there's so much work to be done. We don't need to overlap with each other. Yes?
I recognize the sea star, the whale, the fish. What's that other critter? Is that a nudibranch or something in your logo?
It is a nudibranch. It's a hooded nudibranch. It happens to be my favorite sea creature, so I insisted it be in the logo. One of the nice things about being the executive director, you could say, it's like, oh, we've got some fish this year. I'm like, yeah, there's going to be a nudibranch in there too. So. Yes?
Are you able to tap into some of the historic estuary, and I'm talking about particularly the Comox estuary that has the fishery that's so ancient?
Yeah.
You're able, how do you integrate that knowledge into the modern knowledge?
Yeah, we've, one of the things that we've been doing sort of with our system of looking at these, and it's sort of, a bit glossed over in here, but we've been doing a lot of gathering of historic data, and in a lot of these estuaries we are working with the local First Nations who are providing us with insights into the traditional knowledge and the traditional uses of those, which we're not sharing with anyone because of course we've been asked not to by those First Nations. But certainly any historic data that is available, we're trying our best to pull it in and sort of see how that estuary has changed over time, because that is a big piece of resilience. Is, it's such a difficult thing these days when you talk about, I no longer talk about collecting baseline data because we don't really have a baseline. So we'd have to look back about 300 years in order to see what a baseline for these areas is, and we have such a shifting baseline these days with the rate that change is happening along the coast. So we really just say we're trying to collect current information, current data, and then trying to look at how that has changed over time. But that is a piece of what we're doing. Yes?
The picture, not the logo, but the photograph, where is that?
That's actually in the Prince Rupert Harbor. So that's the Lac Coulomb Ferry, which goes from Prince Rupert up to Lac Coulomb, which is up one of the long fjords up there. It just so happened that we were flying at the time I was perfectly going around the corner. It was one of those times where you just like, oh, I can get the perfect photo. Most of the time we're very focused on the intertidal, but sometimes you just get those pretty photos as well. So, yeah. Well, thank you guys very much for inviting me. I really enjoyed talking to you.
I think I speak for more than myself, but a lot of other people tonight, saying that I did not understand how important seagrass was to our environment. And because we are ocean paddlers and noodle the shore an awful lot, I'm going to keep my eye out for it from now on. I also didn't know about the mapping system, which sounds pretty incredible. And I wish you good luck with both of these projects. I'd like to present you with our Siska mug, the much sought after, seldom seen Siska mug. And I hope you enjoy it, especially in a helicopter, because you can't spill with it. So.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Next month, November, I know there's a lot of people out there who have either been to the Baja or are Baja enthusiasts and would like to go or just curious about it. But in November, our speaker is he's from Mexico, and he's going to be talking to us about the Baja as a winter paddling destination and how it's changed in the last 20 years. I was down there about 20 years ago, and I was also down there last year, so I've seen the change, so it's pretty incredible. So I hope you can join us in November for the meeting. Jane, is there anything you want to add?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Drive safe, paddle safe, and see everybody in November or out water.